Hello, and welcome to the Impact of Infrastructure Automation, Real Examples. Today's webinar is sponsored by Progress and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this timely discussion. Now, before we get to today's great content, we have 4 housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. So not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. And if we don't get to your question, don't worry. The team from Progress will get all the questions that came in, and they'll also have the opportunity to respond to you afterward. Now, that Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there also in the Q&A, and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, and I'd especially like to call your attention to 2 of those from Progress. There's a Chef Courier Early Access link, and there's an ebook on 10 ways to optimize your Chef infrastructure automation investment. So I highly encourage you to check those out now, download them at any time during the presentation. There are also some links there marked ATM, which is from Actual Tech Media. So I encourage you to access all those resources and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section as well. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the details there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So after the event is over, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. Okay, with all that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's great presentation. So I'm excited now to bring on our expert presenters. We have Mark Traister and Joe Nussbaum. So Mark, Joe, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot, Scott. So I was going to take a minute just to express my gratitude for Joe to join us today. Joe's currently and has been for some time now a principal engineer at Workday. One disclaimer is that his thoughts and his contributions today are purely personal. They don't reflect or represent the overall views of Workday. So just keep that in mind. He's a wealth of knowledge, and it's great to have him here. As I said, he's principal engineer in the operations engineering group. He's responsible, or his team's responsible for managing a worldwide set of data centers. He initially, in college, worked at the help desk for the university lab. He's done system administration. He's done kernel performance work. He's been a build engineer. And what I find interesting is he's also very active in the community. So he's been one of the organizers of the DevOps days that happens in Portland, happens to be in Portland. He graduated from Purdue. So anyway, the way we're going to run the session, and by the way, I've kind of spent my career with a bunch of different software companies helping organizations really derive the most value out of their technology efforts. So I've had a long career in terms of working both on the IT side, application development side, as well as more on the go-to-market side around what software companies do. So the way we're going to run the session today is I'm going to start on a number of different topics. And after I cover a little bit about each topic, what we're hearing in the market, what our customers are talking about, what they're trying to do, then we'll bring both you as the audience in with a poll question. And then more importantly, we'll hear from Joe about some of his experiences as it relates to each of these topics. We're going to be casual. We have not practiced this. If there's any issues in terms of our talk track and of things, we'll ask for permission now. But Joe's been a long time supporter of what we've done, and so it's great to kind of move forward. So anyway, the first topic is, really what is infrastructure automation? And I think all of us here that are involved in DevOps, and I think that's probably everybody on the call, or DevSecOps, knows that the foundation of what we're really trying to accomplish is as much as possible to automate everything that we can. And, that plays and provides many different advantages from a person perspective or human perspective. It frees up, our limited human resources to do things that are more interesting, to engage them more effectively in terms of, their job and their life experiences and things like that. And, whether it's DevOps, DevSecOps, platform engineering, the heart of that is really all about automation. And so if you look at some of the key components that make up, that infrastructure automation, certainly configuration management is part of that, where you're starting with how do you, configure on a continuous basis and make sure your infrastructure is up and ready and is in compliance with your standards. But then to extend that to your application so that you can deploy your applications in an automated fashion or as much as possible. And, there's a lot of complication there because applications are much more sophisticated and complex. And, the devices that they run on might be, in the cloud, on premise. They may be, on the edge. It could be Panera, who's trying to manage a set of cafes across the United States, or other organizations that are working with kiosks or, endless number of things that they need to manage. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about job orchestration, which complements what Chef has been able to do long time in terms of being able to manage assets and to do things, using workflow logic. And we'll talk about those use cases as well. So drilling a little bit more into configuration management, it's really, our organizations really strive to do things at scale. And, I think sometimes people hear about scale and they think it's an enterprise issue, but scale is everybody's issue, right? Because if you're a small shop, you're not going to have 10 DevOps people, you might have one. And so scaling to the needs of your organization is important regardless of how big you are. And everybody, I think, also deals with complexity in terms of heterogeneity. It's a mix of on-premise, cloud, and different types of applications and infrastructure running. Being able to automate that in a way that you have a secure SDLC is very important. So that's a lot of what we do with how Chef is implemented. And then kind of that notion of continuous, right? It's not just how you configure something once, but how do you keep it up to date? How do you push changes to it? How do you, scale up or scale down? And how do you do so, to make sure that you meet your security requirements? Extending that to what happens on the application side, it's all around using that single tool chain, not only to do application infrastructure, but the applications themselves from any cloud to any edge and to any on-premise application too, in a way that fits zero trust requirements. We're proven in a lot of large organizations across, very demanding security and conscious organizations such as financial services, healthcare. We work with MITRE very closely on a number of government and defense accounts as well. And, we're not going to get deep into the technology today, but, we've got the right architecture in terms of immutability and being able to manage applications in a portable and discrete way that facilitates better testing and reduces complexity in terms of our customers' behalf. So with that short introduction, we have a poll question here, and you can read it and please respond. Have you used infrastructure automation? We're going to give you guys a couple minutes to answer that. And while we do that, I want to bring Joe in and kind of ask him to kind of share. I think you've been working with Chef for DevOps since 2010 or so. If you could kind of share everything about your journey, I think that would be a great way to start.
Yeah, so when I joined Workday in 2011, there was a small prototype of Chef, and it was running on 5 VMs, and just, they were kicking the tires on it. And, I'd never used Chef. I'd never used Ruby even beforehand. And so when I started digging into it, the concepts, I realized quickly the concepts weren't different from stuff I had done in the past. It was just codified in a much cleaner way instead of ad hoc or having to do things themselves. At my previous job, we were building a multi-headed NAS appliance, and I led the team that was doing the configuration and upgrade procedures and stuff. And I was like, man, that would have been so much easier with something with like Chef that did all that stuff underneath for me. I'm like, oh man, I wish I would have, had this, a few years ago. And it's just, you know, we quickly went from having those, you know, 5 VMs to building out a brand new data center with 212 servers in it. I remember that number specifically because it was 2 more servers than our previous largest data center at the time. And now we have a global footprint of over 70,000 servers in our private data centers. So it's, you know, the scale has gone on.
Oh, that's great. We'll talk a little bit more about scale. And did you guys all hear that? 70,000 servers makes my heart flutter a little bit. But anyway, that's kind of cool. Hey, so here, Joe, any thoughts on this question? I think I'm a little bit surprised that there's not a higher percentage of people that have done some level of infrastructure automation. But I think it does show, you know, people are kind of all over the board in terms of where they are in terms of their journeys as it relates to DevOps and infrastructure automation.
You know what? I would say that I probably think that people are doing things, but not in a formalized way. They may have some bash scripts, or, you know, the one thing I see a lot of people do is they'll have their dot files that whenever they log on to a system, they're copying over if they're from Linux, or figuring out, you know, just those sorts of things of just having your personalized, you know, environment and stuff. So they're doing, I think more people are doing some things that are sort of ad hoc, but not in a real formalized fashion.
Yep, that makes sense. Awesome. Okay, well, let's jump into the next topic, which we shared the results there. So that's good. And so we're going to talk a little bit about infrastructure as code as a foundation for that automation. And infrastructure as code is this concept of taking human readable instructions, either for configuration or for security and compliance checks, and using that as a foundation for Chef to actually do the automation. And on the back of that, obviously, is a full set of reports and visibility into, you know, the actions that Chef took, as well as the status of all of the assets within the fleet. And so what's kind of cool about it is that, you know, it's the best of both worlds. And we talk a lot about infrastructure as code, and there's a lot of helping things. So it's not like you're writing heavy duty code. We have, you know, cookbooks and recipes and things that are starters. And we also have a number of things that you can do from a graphical perspective. But what it allows you to do is really overcome some of the problems with manual processes. You know, we know that it's difficult to scale when you have a set number of people to scale them to support, you know, data servers as they grow, or whatever infrastructure you're managing. It can be error prone and slow. And then in many cases, you know, it doesn't allow you to share knowledge very well, right? You're dependent on somebody maybe writing something down, following instructions from the spreadsheet or whatever. All those things are kind of partly part of the problem. And so kind of infrastructure as code, what it does obviously is it's the foundation for the automation, and it can be done quickly and efficiently. You know, Chef uses what we call a standard declarative language that we call, you know, it is human readable. We have a YAML option as well. And it's not only machine enforceable in terms of how it executes, but you can test it as well, which means you can bake it into your software development lifecycle. Obviously, since it's code, it can be reused and for repeated tasks. And then, you know, the other thing that's kind of unique about Chef is the ability to kind of do everything agnostically. And so instead of being worried about the specifics of an Azure service versus an AWS service, or a Linux thing versus a Windows thing, you know, you just kind of define what you want Chef to do for you, and it does that across your operating environment, whether, you know, it's bare metal, VM, cloud, same with operating system flexibility as well. So I think it's pretty fundamental, but, you know, really what we hear time and time again is we help people organizations be more efficient in terms of being able to maybe use the same number of humans to manage a larger fleet, and to do that effectively, to provide consistency, not only in terms of making sure the application infrastructure is trusted and secure, but it meets your quality standards. So we have a lot of people that meet demanding SLAs using Chef. And then obviously the notion of code allows things to scale very easily. So that's a little bit about infrastructure as code. think now we've got a question for you. And that's a little bit on the maturity side, I guess. On a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest, what is the maturity level of your organization when it comes to automating processes? Okay. And with that, while we wait, I'll bring Joe in. He's shared with me a lot in the past in terms of how they scaled the environment, and would like for you to comment on that a little bit more, Joe. And then maybe any thoughts you have on kind of what role that infrastructure as code plays, or the policy files that we support within the Chef framework.
Yeah, so the one thing you think about is just, you have the DSL there, it's readable. So the one thing I is good about it is that you can also take it to like your manager and say, oh, this is sort of the flow of things are going. You don't have to have the details from the high, because the language, the Chef itself hides all the details of what's happening there, but you get a high level, pretty easily a high level perspective of what's going on. The other thing is, one of the benefits, you talk about scale. I want to also sort of say that there's also sort of like personal interest in this. If you're the only person who knows how to set up the Apache servers on there, and you need to set one up, and you happen to be on vacation, and you're the only one with that knowledge, then somebody's gonna be calling you and interrupting your vacation or whatnot. So I also like to say, from one of the benefits from having it as code is that anybody is able to do it, or it's done automatically, but you understand what's going on. It's not just the what people would call the the bus factor, or the other one is the retirement factor, or the lottery factor. Somebody just wins the lottery and just walks out, and they've lost all that tribal knowledge. If you codified all of those things into your chef cookbooks and stuff, then you don't have to keep up to date on process documents written in Confluence or in Word or whatever. The code is the documentation for those processes.
Yeah, another thing that's interesting about it being a code-based approach is you can manage the Chef code just as you manage the rest of your code. And so I think, checking things in, and so you get the same level of protection, the same ability to manage it as you would any other code artifact.
Right, and plus having a pipeline in there that goes through code reviews that you can have, people, you can also look at and say, oh, what about these cases and things like that. You can come in a code review where you'd have to, before, if people were doing things manually, have to be peering with them, watching what they're doing on the screen and things. So this gives you all those benefits of just being a formalized, software development process and treating it as such. Yep. The other thing, one of the things that I think about is, I've codified into recipes some upgrade procedures, and these are things that don't run all the time, but it's just like, oh, this is a procedure that we run manually, that one would manually, but we just have the code in there that we just invoke it using Chef, so we can do things like, adjusting things, doing upgrades of packages. We're going through upgrading the Chef server, our Chef servers. So we have an upgrade process that goes through the 5 lines, the 5 steps that you need to do it, that's spelled on Progress's upgrade how-to page, and we've codified that such that we can just kick it off, run it instead of typing those things in, and then you can just do those things. So I'm a huge proponent of reuse what you know. So I know Chef and the DSL, and it's an easy way to just codify all those things up for those processes that you have to do as sort of like ad hoc tests or tasks as well.
Yep, that's really great. So it looks like the question kind of like a bell curve. So maybe no surprises here in terms of maturity level. So maybe with that, we'll move on to the next topic. And that's all about really taking this notion of infrastructure as code to policy as code. And so if you think about the genesis of DevOps, it was primarily around getting IT ops and developers to work effectively together, right? That's been extended in many different ways to pull in other participants. So kind of this move to DevSecOps, where we're bringing, security and compliance into the picture as well. So it's really taking that as code approach where you've got code that represents your configuration policies to code that represents your compliance and security policies. And so I think this is really important, because you see research from Microsoft that I think shows 80% plus of ransomware attacks are related to misconfiguration, which, surprised me. I knew it was significant. I didn't realize how significant it was. And that's also represented in terms of what OWASP does in terms of their top 10. And so I think it's number 5 where one of their recommendations, obviously, is to do whatever possible to eliminate configuration errors. And so this is, our response and our support in terms of that work that people have to do. And it's beneficial both to kind of security people that are responsible for protecting and then checking into any breaches that may have happened, to have information at their fingertips around what's happening with the configuration side. But also on the compliance side, many organizations, hit a wall when it comes to meeting compliance reporting, because they kind of have to stop things, do everything manually. That slows things down. That creates tension between developers and IT ops and security and compliance. We've had people that say, hey, for me to meet my audit requirements, all I have to do is print a report from Chef. So it kind of gives you the value of not only helping people, manage risk around misconfiguration, but it supports their efforts in terms of meeting their requirements, regulatory, legal requirements, whether they're, external or internal. So that's really, the notion of bringing, expanding infrastructure to the policy side. And I think I've talked about some of these benefits already, but not only do we have collaboration like Joe talked about in terms of sharing amongst the operations, but to be able to do that across what is done on the security side as well. We see organizations that are managing all of that policy with spreadsheets. Basically, what they can do is they can take those spreadsheets of policies, and convert those into a Chef policy, and then that's what they use to drive all of their security checks. And they can take that beyond that to not only do checking, but to automate any remediation that they need to do as well. And then, of course, there's all types of integration in terms of notifying people through different mechanisms based on what's happening in their environment. It's also part of what we, not only can you scale your configuration work, but you can scale your security and compliance efforts. And I know it's an overblown term in terms of shifting things left, but it truly does allow you to kind of move things earlier into the development process. It kind of breaks down, some of the barriers between what developers need to do and what, compliance and security wants them to do. And so being able to run checks earlier in terms of the SDLC versus security being a gate at the end is another huge benefit that we see in our organizations. And then, I think this kind of goes across everything that we do, having visibility across the fleet in terms of everything that's happening, which is really important, right? Because as you start automating things, you want to know what happened, right? And you want to see the impact of that automation, the benefit of that automation. And, even in the way now that you're starting to manage or measure the value of your DevOps investments and how that ties back to what the business results are tied to your efforts on the technology side. So I know that was quick, and there's a lot more out there in terms of content around policy. And I know it's, a pretty big topic, not only for, our customers, but for industry analysts and things like that as well. So before I bring Joe in to have him kind of comment on, he's talked to me a lot about, hey, we're not just Chef Infra. And for those of you that don't know Chef Infra, that's kind of the product name, so to speak, of our compliance efforts. Infra is for configuration management. And he'll talk to you guys about how they've extended beyond configuration management into what they're doing with security and compliance with a product that we refer to as Inspect. But it's all Chef under the covers. It's all, one framework that supports all of that. So anyway, Joe, could you kind of talk about how you're using Chef not only to configure, but to maintain continuous configuration compliance?
Yes. And so I just want to rewind just a little bit because you were talking about, I want to strike on the thing about continuous, compliance. In a previous world, or many moons ago, I was involved in a few audits, and it was like, you collect all of this collateral for the audit, and it took several weeks to do. Well, I could have collected it on a Monday, and Tuesday it could have fallen out of compliance of what it was, and didn't know it until the next year that we had to do the stuff again. So having that right away, just having it continuous on there is a great thing. So we've been doing security compliance of checking through various CIS controls of running across our fleet of things, and that's been doing it a while. And Inspect is the language Inspect is what you use for when you're working with Chef and developing cookbooks and actually doing testing of it. So it's using this common language all the way through the life cycle. And so lately, we've been extending this, the concept of using Inspect to what I term of, operational compliance. There's a lot of things that you can do to say, is this server configured correctly? And, Chef Infra is great for figuring out all those pieces of saying, this is the thing on the server that it's all configured correctly. But there's a whole lot of stuff in your ecosystem that is outside of your server that needs to be configured properly such that the server is, from an operational perspective, it can be part of your application stack. You're talking about firewall rules is the primary example of this. There's lots of other pieces on there, but the easy one is firewall rules. So if you have this particular server needs to talk to something else, and if it can't talk to it, well, it's not going to be functional. And so, I've seen cases where we've expanded. We expanded a cluster, and there was a networking rule that later found out that there was a networking rule, and it was on a /23 network, but the firewall rule was only for /24. So when we expanded it, it went on the next segment, if you will, and it couldn't talk to it. The cluster couldn't talk to it. So we have all these nodes. They had a few nodes in there, but they couldn't get there. So the jobs could get to it and get routed, but it couldn't report data back. It couldn't, push the data back to the worker nodes. Couldn't push it back to the requesters of it. But we had these checks in place on the servers to say, hey, this is a worker node. It needs to be able to reach this. If it can't, and we got the red flags before we actually enabled it and saying, hey, there's something we've got to fix. We've encountered this a few times with we bring up, new hardware, we bring up new Chef servers and, retire the old ones, and they're on new network segments. Before we make the switch, we want to make sure that everybody can talk to those servers, that they have the access to it. These are your pre-flight checks. And, it's better to, in the one case, the rollout is that we actually delayed it, the migration by a week. But it's better than having to roll out a change, find the problem afterwards, and then roll it back, and then you've got egg on your face. This way you can know going into it that it's going to be successful. And so I always say with this operational compliance piece of it is whenever people have questions about the infrastructure, I said, you can speculate you can speculate, oh, this and that. And he goes, well, we have a system set up where we have a list of all these, a repository for all of these compliance checks. I'm like, write a new compliance check. They check it in, An hour later, it's deployed everywhere. You look at a Splunk dashboard, and lo and behold, you have your answer. Because without that, you're just speculating. It's just an opinion. But if you actually have data, then it's a fact. And so then you can speak and say, yes, this change is safe. So when you go into somebody who's, maybe asking for, oh, well, you're going to roll this out, what's the risk factors? And like, all the servers can talk to it. We know this for a fact. The risk is minimal of making this change. So again, it's just increasing your confidence in making changes in your infrastructure without breaking things.
I like that. I mean, we've talked a lot about continuous, and I like confidence. So that continuous confidence is kind of a cool concept too. So yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and if there's much more. Like we're not diving into all the technicalities today, but if you're interested in the security and compliance piece, it's really interesting in terms of that policy. The policy not only allows you to kind of define what you need to do, but you can define exceptions. You can define waivers that may be time-based or allow you to bypass things that are okay, even though it looks like it's out of compliance with policy. So a lot of really interesting stuff that you can do within spec or with our compliance capabilities there. Awesome. So I think we've got one more topic. Well, we obviously people are all over the board in terms of using different tools. I think there's a lot more that we can do. And like you said, Joe, there's open source tools, there's a bunch, all different ways to approach this, but it's good to see that people are starting to look at some of that stuff. So I want to spend a little bit of time kind of on moving forward. And, the things that we've talked about are configuration management capabilities, and the security and compliance capabilities are all available today in the product. One of the things that is now in trial mode, if you guys want to get early access to what we call job orchestration, that is available, and we'll have a link. Actually, there's a link in one of the assets or the handouts, and then we'll have a reference at the end of this as well. But I want to spend a little bit of time on that. And I think some of what Joe kind of talked about, the work that they are doing in terms of managing, Chef and the nodes and things like that, and maybe doing some things kind of an ad hoc or scheduled basis. It'll be interesting to get his thoughts about how this capability might help them kind of moving forward. And so, there's a variety of things that organizations need to do, and some of them are ad hoc. Maybe there's a new Java vulnerability that's been found, and you want to apply an emergency patch. And so, you can easily automate that using job orchestration. Or maybe you need to roll out a new set of servers or updates, but you need to, maintain a quorum so that your service levels don't go down, your availability doesn't go down. Or maybe you have a really complex set of instructions that says, hey, I need to be able to configure this thing first and then do this and do things in sequence, either for something that happens on an ad hoc basis, or maybe something that happens in terms of like a scheduled task. So maybe you need to restart your nodes daily for any of them that have run out of memory. So that's the type of, there's just endless use cases in terms of that, and condition-based actions in terms of, an OS patch rollout to a sequence of your target nodes, so to speak. So first of all, we talk about job orchestration. We've named that as a product, Chef Courier. So you may have heard about that. That's what kind of allows you to touch on these different use cases here, whether it's a response to an incident, patching, orchestration, being able to manage service requests. It ties directly into support for what we do on the security and compliance side. It can help you on your application deployment side. There's, a lot of different use cases that we're learning about. And as our preview customers are starting to use this, they're coming to us and using it in ways that we haven't even thought about. So it's all pretty exciting. And so when we talk about job orchestration, there's a couple of related items that tie alongside that. And one of them is what we call node management. And so obviously when you're using Chef, there's capabilities around Chef that you need to manage. And so this new capability will provide like a single pane of glass to manage all the nodes in your fleets. So again, back to visibility, with a few clicks, you'll be able to update all of your Chef assets in terms of being able to make sure that it's to the latest version. And then to be able to enroll and maintain each one of those nodes in the dashboard is an important part of what we're doing on the node management side. And then finally, another complement to that is what we refer to as agentless. And so agentless really extends the value of Chef to network devices or to air-gapped environments that are not always connected to the network, or for like a network switch where it's not applicable, or maybe there's a security concern about running an agent. So it really extends the value to all of that. Agents or agentless can be scripted in terms of work around job orchestration. So it all comes together in terms of allowing people to basically apply whatever change they need wherever or whatever set of assets within their fleet that they need to apply it to, and whenever, whether it's ad hoc or scheduled, just like you have the ability to schedule things with recurrence without Outlook. That's very similar model to that. So I know that's a quick preview of our preview, so to speak. But you can reach out to us, and we'll be reaching out to you all about any potential interest that you have in that, and we can go deep dive in terms of what the product is doing, what the capabilities are going to be, and all that. So we're really super excited about what we're going to be doing and bringing to market there. So we've got a question here about what value in terms of orchestration and maybe what use cases come to mind in terms of how you might be able to use job orchestration within your environment as it relates to all things configuration management, application deployment, and so on and so forth. So Joe, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you what your thoughts are and how you think this might be applicable to some of the work that you're doing, or maybe even to make things easier for you in terms of how you've used Chef in the past.
So I think, having there are some things that, ad hoc tasks that are one-time things that you need to do. In my previous world, where I was more hands-on with hardware and stuff, of like having agentless, of like, we'd be rolling in racks of servers and having to go through and configuring top of rack switches and IPMI and configuring the power units for enabling monitoring and setting things up. That would have been make things a whole lot easier and a whole lot simpler. A lot of times there's like I said, there's things that like I just need to take care of this one thing. There's two servers out there that have, that need to be, something done. You could, SSH over to those and fix those couple things. But there are some things where it's just like you want to do some of the ad hoc things. And, especially, you're talking about orchestration. And anytime you have a more complicated, application environment and you have to do things in a certain sequence of pieces of doing upgrades and such, as codifying those things, especially when they're long running, makes all makes all the difference of not having to let workers run and do those things instead of having to watch over those things. And so the orchestration, if it's one or two things, but then afterwards it's like, it's always a question of automation. At what level do you say you should automate this? And people say, well, I have two servers or whatever, and go, well, if you lose that server and you got to rebuild it, then you wish you would have had all the steps and everything on there. So, I see that orchestration as, I think a lot of times people use it they're doing orchestration manually by doing the stuff instead of like having it on there. And especially when you have much larger things, where if you're just working with a teammate and you can coordinate, okay, I'm going to take this node and do this to it, and you do this node, somebody else does the other node. That's easy. But when you start scaling up, then you have lots more of things where you're having to say, okay, well, we need to coordinate this across you know, 64 servers or whatever it is, whatever number it is, it becomes more manageable. It becomes unmanageable when you going up and where you can't just, do it yourself or, work with somebody sitting next to you of doing those things. So that's where orchestration, I really think, benefits.
Yep. That's awesome. Thanks, Joe, for that. Yeah, it looks like kind of a mixed batch in terms of responses about the need for orchestration. So it'll be something for you guys to kind of keep tabs on as you move forward, and maybe some use cases will pop up that you'll see, hey, where this is where job orchestration fits in. So we're going to wrap up pretty soon. I didn't want to spend a lot of time, talking about progress, because I wanted you to understand what we're doing in terms of helping our customers. But Chef is part of Progress. We have a very large focus on infrastructure management. I would say that Chef is the foundation for that work, especially as it relates to DevOps and DevSecOps. But we also have some other capabilities around network monitoring, application performance management, as well as application delivery control, so that if you need any of those capabilities, we're an organization that can provide you some help. Looking at Chef, and I think we've touched on most of this, we talked about our support for different workloads, whether they're running on-premise, in the cloud, or on the edge. And really kind of two pillars, right? A lot of work around configuring, deploying, and managing it, but also to manage it and support what you're doing on the security and compliance side. So you see a number of different things that we do across the different devices that we do, out to the edge, infrastructure management, all the way through, cloud security posture management. We don't have a lot of time today to address that, but we allow you to kind of take what you do with Chef and apply that to cloud native environments. So maybe you don't rely on us to kind of configure your Kubernetes clusters, but we have a lot of organizations that look to say, hey, how do I know that my Kubernetes clusters are set up in the right way, that they haven't drifted, that there hasn't been some change that applied to them? So bringing compliance in and using that consistent way of running compliance checks across everything, including Kubernetes Cloud Native, is kind of a cool thing that we've invested a lot of time in. I've highlighted the things that are new, that are in preview mode in terms of green, in terms of operational orchestration and node management. For those of you that know us well and know our open source heritage, a lot of those capabilities, come on top of proven and trusted Chef tools, which we've kind of referred to as Chef Infra, Chef Inspec, and a number of other things. But, from a Progress point of view, we really just make Chef easy for you to use and to drive value very quickly from your investment in terms of what you're doing on the DevOps side. So with that, I want to thank Joe and let him, share any of his thoughts in terms of, how does he kind of look forward? Not so much in terms of like technology, but what's his approach in terms of, because he talks a lot about like continuous improvement and learning and things like that. So I should just be quiet and let Joe kind of share any parting thoughts with you guys.
So I always say that, you should be always continuing, learning new things. If you don't look back at some code that you've written 6 months ago and say, hey, there's a better way I could improve on this, then you're not learning. You're not learning new technologies or things like that, at least being exposed to them and thinking about things differently. So there's that. And the one thing I always say is that it's you got to find that you really have to be passionate about whatever you're doing, the work that you're doing. Because if you're not passionate, you're not going to do a great job on it. You're not going to dig into it. So a lot of times, when I interview people and such, and I more look for people who are passionate about the work, who are interested in doing it and whether the experience, because a lot of times infrastructure work is kind of thankless work. It's like, when's the last time that you had a rough day at work and you went home and you went into your fridge and got a cold beverage and you so thankful for that cold beverage, you called up your power company and thanked them for keeping the lights on, the power on? Probably never. And so a lot of times with infrastructure, the only time that your people come to you is when things aren't working. And so you have to be okay with being thankless work, and you have to think about, it's also very hard to measure all the incidents that were prevented. It's easy to track all the times that you responded to incidents and stuff like that, but what about all the things that were prevented? That's very difficult to sort of do things, and that's what you're kind of doing. You're doing preventative. A lot of the work is preventative. And then the one thing I just wanted to close with is that years ago, Jez Humboldt, when he's talking about DevOps, coined the term CALMS, and that's culture, automation, lean, measurement, and sharing. And I'd like to add another letter to that acronym, and that's an E for empathy. I think that if we just, if we all acted more empathetic, if something comes, if something happens, your teammate wasn't purposely trying to break it. So don't take things personally and just be empathetic, and I think it just have a better work environment if there was more empathy. That and the world if there was more empathy.
That was awesome, Joe. Gosh, I feel inspired, excited, and all those things. So I really do appreciate it. And we'll now move into the Q&A section. And the only thing I want you guys to know is, as part of the Q&A, I'll just leave this up there. We already talked about that early access to enterprise job orchestration, or what we refer to as Chef Career. That allows you to do those controlled rollouts in whatever form or fashion you need to do that. You can go to the link there or click it on the assets piece as part of the webinar capabilities. And then we're also offering, back to Joe's point about continuous learning, there's that, it's an awesome way of thinking about things. And we do as much as we can to minimize, the learning curve in terms of using Chef, and a lot of product capabilities are made to make things very easy. But we also have, what we call Learn Chef, which has a bunch of coursework in it. It has lab hours baked into it, and then you can also go through a certification process as well. So we're offering a 20% discount off of that. We'll be reaching out to you if you're interested in how you can apply that going forward. And I think that's it, except for whatever questions we might have, Scott.
Okay. Yeah. Great presentation. And Joe, love the metaphor about the thanking the power company when there's a cold beverage. I've never done that. So first question we have here is, what deployment options are available for Chef?
That's a good question. So, we talked about our ability to support a lot of different workloads. We also have the ability to run Chef in pretty much any environment that you want to, either on premise. You can take the license and run it on premise, installed on premise. You can take your own license and run it in the cloud. You can consume our capabilities through what we call a SaaS offering, or you can actually even acquire Chef and run it via the AWS and Azure marketplaces. So just as we support a lot of different flexibility in terms of applications and infrastructure, we support a lot of different models in terms of whatever is easiest to deploy, including SaaS. And I should have referred to this more effectively than I did earlier, because then, all the things that you might have to do in terms of managing Chef, we take care of for you. So a very natural way for people to consume Chef.
Okay, excellent. Next one here. How do you work alongside DevOps capabilities provided by public cloud vendors like Azure and AWS?
That's a good question. I'll probably even take a step back and say, if you think about the typical software development lifecycle, every software development lifecycle, even, 5 different SDLCs within one organization may have a different set of tools, right? And so while, we're a big proponent of trying to standardize that, we're also not going to dictate how you do Chef in terms of what you're doing. So we're more about how do we fit into how you want to run your software development lifecycle, and not only in terms of integration with other products, but also with other capabilities. So, for example, with DevOps, I mean, with Azure, we have situations where organizations are using some of the Azure capabilities to manage what they're doing in Azure, and then they're using our compliance capabilities to come back in and check to make sure that drift hasn't happened, not only in terms of like the application and infrastructure components, but for the AWS or Azure services as well. So it's really a nice complement. It's not, Azure DevOps or AWS DevOps capabilities versus Chef. It's really, in fact, they're great partners with us in terms of the work that we do with them. And, same thing with security, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that Chef is the only tool you need for security, but it's part of your, tool belt, so to speak, and an important part in terms of managing configuration errors. But that's going to be running right alongside whatever you need to do with perimeter security or, all the other capabilities that you're using to make sure your environments are secure.
Okay. Excellent. We have another question here from Paul. So you were just talking about, Azure and AWS. That's pretty modern infrastructure. Paul's question is, should automation be introduced into legacy environments and infrastructure? And if so, in what ways could legacy infrastructure benefit from automation?
Joe, do you want to? Do you have a thought on that?
I'm going to answer. There was a talk from a few years ago at one of the Chef Comps, and I remember, and it was fascinating because they were doing DevOps on IBM mainframes using the concepts of the stuff. And it was like, just because, you may have the applications running there or you have historical data or things like that, doesn't mean that those things don't apply to those legacy environments. You can apply DevOps principles anywhere across the board. One of my coworkers has a home lab of 5 machines, and he's running a Chef to manage all of those things for doing his little tinkerings of things. I personally have developed a cookbook to configure my laptop. So whenever I get a laptop refresh, I don't have to spend a whole day installing everything back on, all the different packages and stuff on there. It's just, here it is. And it's a much easier cycle to getting back going on there. So really it boils down to the question is, why wouldn't you? I mean, taking those why would you apply those principles to any of the legacy systems? Yes, you may have to. You're not going to boil the ocean right away, but all the things that you might want to do, start introducing infrastructure automation, or even just the concepts of doing it, of testing, of testing, codifying things. I mean, even if it's you're on some legacy systems that don't, that Chef doesn't run on. Maybe target mode is a thing on there, or at least just taking some of the concepts of, hey, there's a configuration file. We're going to check that in source control, and then we're going to copy it over to the system so that we have a source of truth, and we can say, well, what happened? You can diff the files and say what happened between this week and last month, of what changed, something happened, what something on this legacy system, the behavior is different. It's why wouldn't why wouldn't you?
And I think to add on to that point, I mean, the Chef community, not to brag, is so broad and so extensive and so widely used that I'd almost say you couldn't. Well, this is a stretch, but it'd be difficult to find some environment that Chef hasn't been used to support in some way, shape, or form. And I think you'll see that if you join the community. We have community supported efforts that provide what we call content that allows you to use that content to manage pretty much any different type of environment, whether it's older or new. And then we have Chef Premium content too that allows you to do that. So the community can really be a huge benefit too, in terms of learning from and then understanding how to use Chef, in these different environments. So a really good question.
Excellent. Excellent. We've got another question here from Warren that's really interesting. Warren's asking, will AI make coding easier for people who don't know how to code? And I guess I'd just like to bring that more into the context of today's conversation. What are you guys seeing as far as, either within the chef community or being built into the tools as far as, is there a role for generative AI to help people make their own cookbooks without necessarily having the technical capabilities, or is that dangerous? Like, what do you guys see there?
I mean, I'll answer real quickly, because we've done a lot of research recently because there is so much hype around AI, right? And now with ChatGPT, that kind of brings a lot of things into play. From a progress perspective, we try to, we use AI and analytics kind of on a purpose-built way, right? So in some cases, we're using algorithms to analyze data that is output from Chef. And we do that across some of our other products in terms of what we do with Flowmon and our ability to manage application flow data to detect potential, malfeasance or bad stuff that's happening. And we use an algorithm to do that. I mean, I don't want to get into a big, discussion probably about, the impact. I mean, clearly there's an impact. We're starting to see people using AI to help their development efforts, which I think is good if they do it in the right way. But Joe, what from a practical standpoint, what are you hearing and seeing these days?
So, it's just amplified. You can think of like, Stack Overflow, just amplified of various things. Is that, as an exercise, I looked at something and was just talking about some SSL sort of thing, and it was showing some example code, and it had SSL, in the example code that it provided to me was disabling SSL verification. So then you're prone for an attack, an imposter attack that's being built in. So with any of these models, you have to trust the data source that that they're not that there aren't bad actors out there feeding, because it'll look at the code, it's looking at the code and saying, oh, here's examples. I found 5,000 examples of the code, and if they're all bad examples of things, then it's going to suggest bad examples carrying forward. And so that's the only thing that I've I'm just concerned with, is just about trusting that data that's feeding the models, that it actually is good data, that it's been curated, or to say that for the examples that it's using, it's the same sort of thing, just amplified, because you could just do Google searches and find examples of stuff. It just makes it faster. And of course, there's lots of stuff that are bad. And so you really have to know how to craft it, to find the proper examples. I always talk about that, software development, we always, reuse, in any other field, it'd be called plagiarism. But in software, it's actually encouraged. It's software reuse. You're encouraged to do it. And I've always said that if there's 5 examples of how to do something out there in the code base that people are going to go up and search for, the odds are they're going to pick the worst possible example, and then it just keeps on spreading all the bad examples of the things. So yes, there's the potential. There's a potential for good in there, but as with anything, you have to look at it. You can't just trust what it's giving you. You need to go back and verify what it is. It can show you great examples of things, and such. But you have to really still apply your eye to it and say, is this right or not?
Mm-hmm. That's great context. Yeah, and I mean, what you were saying about the Google, case where people are Googling code snippets and things, at least there you can get some clue about the source. Whereas if you get it from an LLM. It's just, output, with no footnoting. Yeah, so great context. Appreciate that. Hey, we're just about up on time. Joe, I did want to ask you. We've sort of got a mixed crowd here as far as people's experience with Chef as sort of a power user, a longtime user. Any tips or recommendations for people getting started with it, just like low hanging fruit projects or anything like that?
So one thing that, one thing is that, join the community. There's a community Slack. The community is why I stay with Chef. It's a very vibrant and welcoming community and stuff. Start small. I mean, some people say, "Well, I don't know Ruby." Well, there's a page on Chef's documentation. It's like all the Ruby you need to know to do Chef in 10 minutes, and literally that's it. That's the name of I think that's the name of the document. It's a DSL. It's built in Ruby. You don't need to know a lot of Ruby to do it, and but you start small. You test things out. Learn Chef is a great environment for doing that, because you have instances where they'll have exercises of doing various exercises of like saying, here, install a package. Okay, now let's test and make sure that package is on there. So it walks you through that workflow of having to do that. So I just saying that don't be daunted by it. It may seem like a lot, but you can just start small. I mean, just if you're going to something, I'm speaking all because it's all a Linux shop, but can write a cookbook if you're wanting to introduce it, just to update Etsy Matti to say hi, and get that sort of sense of like, oh wow, it just updated all my servers and it's doing there, and seeing the power of it. Start small and get little wins in there and such. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Awesome. And Mark, anything to add here as a closing thought, or getting started tips?
No, I think I'm learning from Joe every time I talk to him, so it's all great. But yeah, just want to encourage everybody, if you have any interest in what we've talked about, there's a wealth of information both from the community and from Progress. Even to the question, if you have an example of legacy systems you want to know about Chef, reach out to us and we'll engage you with that. So anything we can do to help you on your journey, just let us know.
Okay.
And thanks, Scott, and for everything that you and Actual Tech Media have done for us today.
My pleasure. Thanks. This has been a great conversation. Really appreciate you both being here and sharing all your insights today.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business, and that is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is Roy Crooks from Ohio. So congratulations to Roy. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Progress for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.